The emergency beacon cut through space like a scream in the dark. Dr. Alara's forearms moved quickly across her control panel as the signal reached Terminus Medical Station. Her large purple eyes focused on the readings streaming across her screen. A human vessel, badly damaged, drifting near the asteroid belt that surrounded their orbital facility. Another mining accident, she muttered to herself in her native Vorthak language. Humans were always pushing their luck in the dangerous mining zones. Their ships were old, their safety systems basic compared to other species, but they paid well for medical services, and Alara had treated dozens of them over the years. The docking bay doors opened with a mechanical hiss. Alara watched through the observation window as the rescue shuttle brought in a single occupant. The man lay unconscious on a stretcher, his body twisted at wrong angles. Blood covered his torn clothing. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "Prep Surgical Bay 3, Alara called to her assistant. "Full spinal trauma protocol." The medical droids activated as soon as the human was wheeled into the surgical suite. These were the best machines money could buy. Helix 7000 models with advanced scanning and surgical capabilities. Their smooth metallic bodies moved with perfect precision around the patient. Alara checked the man's identification chip. David Reed, cargo hauler, 32 years old. His ship's log showed he had been transporting rare metals when his vessel struck an unmarked asteroid. Simple bad luck, it seemed. The first medical droid began its scan, blue light washing over David's broken body. His spine had taken the worst damage. 3 vertebrae were shattered and fragments of bone pressed against his spinal cord. Without immediate surgery, he would never walk again. "Begin stabilization," Alara ordered. The droids worked in perfect harmony. The first one carefully exposed the damaged area of David's spine. The second prepared bone grafts and synthetic nerve tissues. The third monitored his vital signs and administered precise doses of medications to keep him stable. Everything proceeded normally, until the scanning droid detected something unusual. "Foreign objects detected in spinal column," the machine announced in its calm electronic voice. Alara moved closer to examine the readouts. There, embedded deep within David's vertebrae, were small metallic objects. They were perfectly cylindrical, about the size of rice grains, and they seemed to be made of an unknown alloy. "Medical implants," she said, though something felt wrong about that explanation. The objects were too primitive-looking, too rough around the edges. They didn't match any human medical technology she had seen before. "Initiating detailed scan," the second droid said. The blue scanning beam intensified, probing deeper into David's spine. For a moment, the metallic objects seemed to pulse with their own faint light. Then something extraordinary happened. All 3 medical droids stopped moving at exactly the same instant. Alara stared in confusion as the machines froze mid-operation. Their optical sensors dimmed, then blazed bright red. Warning symbols flashed across every screen in the surgical bay. "Survivor Zero Protocol activated," appeared in large letters on the main display. What? Alara had never seen this message before. "Computer, explain Survivor Zero Protocol." "Access denied," the computer replied. "Medical operations suspended. Initiating containment procedures." The surgical bay's doors slammed shut with a loud bang. Emergency lights began flashing. A klaxon alarm echoed through the medical station. Alara tried to override the lockdown, but every system refused to respond to her commands. The medical droids remained frozen around David's unconscious form. Their surgical tools hung motionless in the air. The man's spine lay open and exposed, but the machines would not continue their work. "Computer, the patient will die without immediate surgery," Alara said urgently. "Patient classification, priority 0. Medical intervention prohibited." Alara had never heard of a priority 0 classification. In 40 years of medical practice, she had treated every species in the galaxy. There were difficult cases, dangerous patients, even criminals under guard. But she had never encountered a situation where the medical computers simply refused to provide care. She tried to access the station's medical database to learn more about these mysterious implants. The system allowed her to search, but every query about the metallic objects returned the same result. Information classified under galactic preservation protocols. David's breathing became more labored. His vital signs flickered on the monitors, growing weaker by the minute. Whatever these implants were, The medical station's computers seemed to consider them more dangerous than letting a patient die. Alara's communication panel chimed. Station Commander Rothan's face appeared on the screen. The reptilian saurian looked deeply concerned, his scales shifting to a darker shade that indicated stress. Dr. Alara, what is the nature of this emergency? He asked. Half the station's security systems just activated. I have a human patient with unknown implants in his spine, she explained quickly. The medical droids detected them and then shut down completely. Something called Survivor Zero Protocol. Rothan's large eyes widened. Survivor Zero? That designation hasn't been used in... I need to contact the Galactic Council immediately. Commander, this man needs surgery now or he'll die. Doctor, if the Survivor Zero Protocol has been activated, that man may already be more dangerous than you realize. The communication ended, leaving Alara alone with her unconscious patient and the frozen medical droids. She looked down at David Reed. He appeared completely ordinary. Brown hair, pale skin, the typical build of a human cargo worker. There was nothing about him that seemed threatening or unusual, except for those strange implants. She tried once more to manually restart the medical droids, but they would not respond. Their programming had been overridden by something far more powerful than her authority as chief medical officer. David's eyelids fluttered. He was beginning to wake up despite the massive trauma to his body. That in itself was unusual. Most patients with his injuries would remain unconscious for days if they survived at all. Where am I? He whispered, his voice hoarse and confused. You're in a medical facility. Alara said gently. There was an accident with your ship. David tried to move and gasped in pain. I can't feel my legs. Please don't try to move. You have severe spinal injuries. As David lay there barely conscious, the metallic implants in his spine began to emit a very faint humming sound. The medical scanners detected increased electrical activity around the objects, but the droids remained frozen, unable or unwilling to investigate further. Outside the surgical bay, Alara could hear the sound of security personnel running through the corridors. Emergency protocols were activating throughout the station, all because of a few small metal objects in an injured human's spine. She looked at David's pale face and wondered what terrible secret lay hidden in his body. What could be so dangerous that advanced medical computers would rather let him die than risk examining those implants too closely? The humming from his spine grew slightly louder, and David's vital signs began to stabilize despite his critical injuries. Something was happening inside his body, something the station's computers clearly feared. Whatever David Reed really was, Alara realized this was just the beginning. Red warning lights pulsed through every corridor of Terminus Medical Station. In the command center, screens flickered with alerts that Commander Rothan had never seen before. Ancient security protocols were activating one by one, systems that had been dormant for thousands of years suddenly coming online. Sir, we're receiving priority transmission requests from 17 different Galactic Council worlds, reported Lieutenant Voss, her tentacles working frantically at her control station. They're all asking about a Survivor Zero alert. Rothan stared at the main display. The medical bay remained in complete lockdown. The human patient was still alive, but something about his presence had triggered responses buried so deep in their computer systems that even he, as station commander, couldn't override them. How long since the protocol activated? He asked. 14 minutes, sir. The automated distress signal has already reached the nearest council patrol. In the medical bay, Dr. Alara watched helplessly as David Reed's condition continued to mystify her. His spine was severely damaged, yet his vital signs were slowly improving instead of deteriorating. The strange humming from the metallic implants had grown stronger, and now she could see faint patterns of light moving beneath his skin along his nervous system. What's happening to me? David asked weakly. His eyes were more alert now despite his injuries. I'm not sure, Alara admitted.
Can you tell me about those implants in your spine?
David's face showed genuine confusion. Implants? I don't have any implants. I've never had surgery except for a broken arm when I was 12. The medical scanners confirmed he was telling the truth, at least as far as he knew it. His stress patterns and brain activity indicated complete honesty. Yet the implants were clearly visible on every scan, embedded so deeply in his bone structure that they must have been there for years. Meanwhile, in the station's data archives, Automated systems were searching through records that hadn't been accessed in millennia. Deep in the classified historical databases, fragments of information began to surface about something called the Endured. The computer found mentions scattered across dozens of ancient texts. A species that had vanished from the galaxy over 50,000 years ago. The records were incomplete, many deliberately destroyed, but certain facts emerged. The Endured had possessed technology that allowed them to adapt to any environment, survive any catastrophe, and heal from injuries that would kill other species. They had also been systematically hunted to extinction. Back in the medical bay, David was trying to sit up despite Alara's protests. The injuries that should have left him paralyzed seemed to be healing at an impossible rate. New bone tissue was forming around the damaged vertebrae, and the swelling in his spinal cord was reducing rapidly. "I feel strange," David said, looking at his hands. "Everything seems sharper somehow. I can hear conversations from other rooms. Is that normal?" Alara checked her instruments. David's brain activity was increasing across all measured frequencies. His hearing had indeed become more acute. He was picking up sounds from 3 rooms away. His vision was improving too, pupils adjusting to light levels with mechanical precision. "David, I need you to stay calm, but something unusual is happening to your body. Those implants in your spine appear to be activating some kind of enhancement process. That's impossible. I'm just a cargo hauler. I transport minerals and machine parts between mining colonies. There's nothing special about me." The medical computer suddenly spoke. "Genetic analysis complete. Subject exhibits markers consistent with extinct species designation. Endured prime. Threat level, immeasurable." Alara went cold. She had studied ancient history in medical school. The Endured were mentioned in the oldest textbooks as a cautionary tale about genetic manipulation taken too far. They had been described as peaceful traders who gradually developed abilities that made other species uncomfortable. Eventually, that discomfort had turned to fear, and fear had turned to violence. "Computer, why is this man classified as a threat?" Endured genetic markers indicate potential for rapid adaptation, enhanced intelligence, accelerated healing, and technological integration capabilities. Historical records indicate previous specimens achieved godlike status before containment protocols were implemented. David heard every word. His enhanced hearing meant nothing in the medical bay was private anymore. Godlike status? What does that mean? Before Alara could answer, the station shuddered. Through the observation windows, they could see 3 massive ships dropping out of hyperspace. Council warships, their hulls gleaming with weapon arrays and shield generators. Commander Rothan's voice came over the intercom. "All personnel, prepare for council inspection. We have been ordered to maintain full quarantine until arrival of specialized containment teams." "Containment teams?" David asked, his voice rising. "They're talking about me, aren't they?" Alara nodded reluctantly. "David, I think your people aren't exactly what the galaxy believes them to be." The humming from David's implants was becoming audible now. The lights in the medical bay flickered in rhythm with the sound. Every piece of electronic equipment in the room was responding to his presence, their displays showing patterns that matched his brainwaves. "I can feel them," David whispered, looking around at the medical devices. "The machines. I can sense how they work, what they're thinking. Machines don't think, David. These do. They're scared." He looked directly at the frozen medical droids. "They know what I'm becoming, even if I don't." On the main command screen, Commander Rothan was receiving a direct transmission from Admiral Cortex of the Hegemony Fleet. The Council's most experienced xenocide specialist appeared on screen, his cybernetic implants gleaming against gray skin. "Commander, you have an Endured specimen on your station. This presents an immediate threat to galactic security. Sir, it's just one injured human. There is no such thing as just one when it comes to the Endured. Their genetic legacy was supposed to be extinct. If even one of them has survived with active implants, they could potentially awaken others across the galaxy." Rothan felt his blood chill. Humans were scattered across thousands of worlds working as traders, miners, laborers, and explorers. If they were all descendants of this dangerous species. "Sir, what are your orders?" "Complete sterilization. The specimen cannot be allowed to leave your station alive." In the medical bay, David suddenly stood up. His spine, which had been shattered just hours before, now supported his weight perfectly. The surgical incision had sealed itself without scarring. He moved with fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone who had been near death. "They're going to kill me," he said simply, having overheard the transmission with his enhanced hearing. Alara made a decision that surprised herself. "Then we need to find another way. Why would you help me? You don't even know what I am." She looked at this young man who was transforming before her eyes. Despite everything the computers were telling her about his dangerous potential, she saw only confusion and fear in his face. "Because you're my patient, and because I think the galaxy might be wrong about your people." David touched one of the medical consoles. Immediately, its screen lit up with information that had been locked away for millennia. Ancient star charts, genetic records, and historical documents that told a very different story about the Endured than what the Council believed. "My God," Alara breathed, reading the data flooding across the screen. "You weren't the aggressors. You were refugees." Outside, the Council ships moved into attack formation. Inside the medical bay, David Reed was becoming something the galaxy had tried very hard to forget. And in the depths of space, on distant human colonies, other descendants began to feel strange stirrings in their genetic memory. The awakening had begun. David Reed stood in the center of the medical bay, his body crackling with energy that made the air itself seem alive. Every electronic device in the room responded to his presence. Screens flickered with patterns that matched his heartbeat, and the frozen medical droids twitched as if trying to break free from their programming locks. "I can see everything," David whispered, his eyes reflecting the blue glow from the monitors. "The station's entire network is like a map in my mind." Dr. Alara watched in fascination and growing concern as her patient transformed before her eyes. David's injuries had healed completely, but more than that, he seemed to be evolving in real time. His movements were too quick, too precise. His awareness of his surroundings had expanded beyond normal human limits. "David, I need you to try to stay calm. Can you control what's happening to you?" "I'm not sure. It feels like waking up from a dream I didn't know I was having." He touched the wall, and immediately the room's lighting adjusted to a more comfortable level. "The implants aren't just healing me. They're connecting me to things, teaching me." Through the medical bay's sealed doors, they could hear the sound of heavy boots in the corridors. The Council's containment teams had boarded the station. Alara accessed her personal terminal and began searching through the historical records that David's touch had unlocked. What she found made her question everything she thought she knew about galactic history. The Endured had not been conquerors or tyrants. They had been explorers and healers spreading across the galaxy as peaceful traders and scientists. Their adaptive technology had been developed not for war, but for survival in the harsh environments they encountered as they pushed the boundaries of known space. "Look at this," Alara said, pointing to an ancient medical record. "Your people were immune to the plague that wiped out the Centauri colonies. They shared their healing technology freely." David read the document with speed that should have been impossible. His enhanced mind absorbed the information in seconds. "Then why does everyone fear us?" The answer came from deeper in the archives. The Endured had made a crucial mistake. They had been too successful. Their technology allowed them to adapt to any environment, learn any skill, solve any problem. Other species began to feel inferior, then threatened, then desperate. "Fear," Alara said quietly, "pure fear of being replaced." The records showed the systematic campaign that followed. False accusations of aggression, fabricated evidence of the Endured attempting to dominate other species, propaganda that painted their peaceful adaptations as preparations for conquest. World after world had turned against them. "They made us into monsters in their stories," David said, his voice heavy with the weight of recovered memory. "Then they hunted us based on the lies they created." Outside the medical bay, Commander Rothan was trying to buy time. The Council forces had taken control of his station, but he was stalling their advance toward the medical section. What he had learned from the historical records made him question the wisdom of following Council orders. "Admiral Cortex, the historical data suggests the Endured were not the threat our records indicate." The Admiral's cold voice came through the communicator. "Commander, you are not qualified to interpret classified historical data." "The Endured were eliminated for good reason. Even one survivor represents an unacceptable risk." "Sir, this man saved my medical officer's life when a power coupling exploded near the surgical bay. He's shown no aggressive behavior. The Endured are masters of deception. Their enhanced intelligence makes them extremely dangerous manipulators." Do not be fooled by apparent benevolence. In the medical bay, David had accessed the station's complete sensor array. His enhanced abilities allowed him to process information from hundreds of different instruments simultaneously. He could see the Council ships positioning for bombardment, track the movement of every soldier on the station, even monitor communications between the vessels. They're not just going to kill me, he told Alara. They're going to destroy the entire station to make sure nothing survives. That's impossible. There are 300 innocent people on this station. Acceptable casualties to prevent the endured from returning. David's voice carried a sadness that seemed older than his 32 years. This has all happened before. The implants in his spine were now fully active, their humming audible throughout the medical bay. But they were doing more than just enhancing David's physical abilities. They were unlocking genetic memories that had been dormant for generations, connecting him to the accumulated knowledge of his entire species. He saw flashes of ancient battles, not fought by the endured but fought against them. Peaceful colonies burning as Council forces implemented preemptive strikes. Families separated and scattered across the galaxy. Children growing up without knowing their true heritage, their implants dormant and their abilities suppressed. We didn't die out, David realized. We just forgot who we were. Alara was reading deeper into the historical files. It says here that the endured developed their implants after the first attacks against them. They weren't weapons, they were survival tools. Each time they tried to wipe us out, we adapted, became harder to kill, faster to heal, better at hiding. David's eyes blazed with understanding. The implants contain the memories of every generation that survived. Every lesson learned in blood. The medical bay's doors suddenly buckled under an explosive charge. Council soldiers in full combat armor poured through the opening. Weapons raised and targeting systems locked onto David. Specimen, we'll surrender immediately, the lead soldier commanded through his helmet speakers. David looked at these armed figures and felt something awakening in his mind that terrified him. Not aggression, but knowledge. His enhanced intellect instantly analyzed their equipment, their tactics, their weaknesses. He could see a dozen ways to disable them all without causing permanent harm, but he also saw where that path led. Every time the endured had defended themselves, their actions had been twisted into evidence of their dangerous nature. Self-defense became aggression in the stories told afterward. I surrender, David said, raising his hands. The soldiers moved to restrain him. But the moment they touched his skin, their equipment began to malfunction. Their armor systems crashed, their weapons powered down, and their communications went dead. David's implants were interfacing with their technology involuntarily, his nervous system learning and adapting to every piece of hardware they carried. I'm not doing this on purpose, he said urgently to Alara. The implants are reacting automatically. One of the soldiers, now defenseless without his technological armor, drew a simple metal blade. Primitive weapons only, he ordered his team. Just like the old protocols. As they advanced with their crude knives, David felt his body preparing to fight back. His muscles tensed with strength that could easily break bones. His reflexes accelerated to the point where the soldiers seemed to move in slow motion. His mind calculated strike patterns that would neutralize the threat efficiently. But in that moment of crisis, David Reed made a choice that no one expected. Instead of fighting, he did something that the endured had done countless times throughout history when faced with extinction. He adapted. Rather than matching violence with violence, David opened his mind fully to the station's systems. Every screen in the medical bay lit up with the true historical records of his people. The real story of the endured, told not through council propaganda, but through their own preserved memories. For the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy would hear their side of the story, and across human space, dormant implants began to pulse with answering light. Admiral Cortex stepped through the damaged doorway of the medical bay, his cybernetic implants gleaming against pale skin scarred by decades of warfare. Behind him, elite council commandos spread throughout the room, their primitive weapons drawn and ready. The Admiral's cold eyes fixed on David Reed, who stood calmly beside the bank of screens displaying his people's true history. So, the last endured finally reveals himself, Cortex said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I have spent my career hunting your kind across the galaxy. I never expected to find one still alive. David met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. The implants in his spine hummed with power, but he kept his enhanced abilities in check. I'm not the last. You just never knew where to look. Dr. Alara moved protectively between David and the soldiers. Admiral, this man has done nothing wrong. The historical records clearly show. The records show nothing, Cortex interrupted. The Endured are masters of deception. They can fabricate data, manipulate minds, rewrite history itself to serve their purposes. He gestured to the screens around them. This is exactly the kind of psychological warfare they employed before. David touched one of the medical consoles, and immediately new data flooded the displays. Not fabricated records, but live transmissions from across human space. On mining colonies, trade stations, and frontier worlds, ordinary humans were experiencing something extraordinary. Their dormant implants were awakening. It's happening everywhere, David said quietly. The genetic locks are failing. 50,000 years of suppressed evolution is catching up in a matter of hours. On the screens, they could see surveillance footage from dozens of worlds. Human workers suddenly displaying impossible strength, traders speaking alien languages they had never learned, miners surviving cave-ins that should have killed them instantly. The galaxy's vast population of seemingly ordinary humans was remembering what they truly were. Cortex watched the feeds with growing alarm. How many of you are there? Billions, David replied. We're the cargo haulers you depend on to transport your goods. The miners who extract your resources. The maintenance workers who keep your stations running. We've been hiding in plain sight for millennia. The Admiral activated his personal communicator. All fleet units implement Cleansing Protocol 7 across all human colonies. Authorization Cortex Alpha 7, Alara gasped in horror. Cleansing Protocol? You're ordering genocide. I'm preventing the extinction of every other species in the galaxy, Cortex said coldly. The Endured cannot be allowed to achieve full awakening. David's enhanced hearing picked up the Admiral's subspace communications. Across the galaxy, Council warships were receiving orders to bombard human settlements from orbit. Civilian populations who had no idea of their true heritage were about to be slaughtered for the crime of their genetics. Something changed in David's expression. The careful restraint he had been maintaining began to crack. The implants in his spine flared with brilliant light, and every piece of technology in the medical bay responded to his emotional state. You're going to murder billions of innocent people, David said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the room's metal walls vibrate. Innocent? Cortex laughed harshly. Your people destroyed the Helix Empire. They absorbed the knowledge of the First Dynasty. They turned the proud warriors of the Star Throne into their willing servants. Every species they encountered either knelt before them or was replaced by them. That's not what happened, David said, accessing deeper memories from his genetic archive. The Helix Empire collapsed because of their own civil wars. The First Dynasty was already extinct when we arrived at their worlds. The Star Throne warriors joined us because we offered them something their leaders never had: purpose beyond conquest. Admiral Cortex drew an ancient plasma weapon, its design dating back to the original wars against the Endured. Lies, just as your ancestors lied when they claimed to come in peace. We did come in peace. Every time. The Admiral's weapon powered up with a high-pitched whine. And every time you ended up ruling the systems you visited. Coincidence? David felt his body preparing for combat. His enhanced reflexes could easily disarm Cortex before the Admiral could fire. His strength could snap the man's neck without effort. His intellect had already calculated 17 different ways to eliminate every threat in the room. But he also understood something that the Admiral did not. Every act of violence committed by the Endured, even in self-defense, had been used to justify greater violence against them. The pattern had repeated for 50,000 years: persecution, resistance, escalation, and near extinction. Dr. Alara, David said without taking his eyes off Cortex. Access Medical Base Subsection 12 in the archives. Alara's fingers flew over her console. I don't understand. These are genetic analysis reports from, oh my God. The screens filled with data that made the Admiral pause. Genetic scans of hundreds of species throughout the galaxy, all showing traces of Endured DNA. Not from conquest or absorption, but from interbreeding, families that had formed naturally over thousands of years. You didn't just try to exterminate us, David said softly. You tried to exterminate your own relatives. Cortex stared at the data, his cybernetic implants processing the information rapidly. The genetic markers were unmistakable. His own DNA profile appeared on one of the screens showing clear endured ancestry dating back over 1,000 years. Impossible. I am pure hegemony stock. Your great-grandmother was half endured. Your cybernetic implants work so well because your nervous system is naturally compatible with the technology. David's voice carried deep sadness. You've been hunting your own family, Admiral. The weapon in Cortex's hand wavered. Around him, his soldiers were also staring at the genetic displays. Many of them showed similar mixed heritage. The pure species they believed themselves to be were revealed as hybrids, their enhanced abilities explained by dormant endured genetics. This changes nothing, Cortex said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Mixed breeding doesn't eliminate the threat. What threat? David asked. Look at the data, Admiral. Every world where endured refugees settled became more prosperous. Disease rates dropped, technological advancement accelerated, quality of life improved for everyone. Because you absorbed their civilizations. Because we healed them. David accessed the medical station's historical database and projected a new set of records. Not military reports or political propaganda, but medical journals and economic data spanning thousands of years. The pattern was clear. Wherever the endured had settled, the local population had thrived. We don't absorb civilizations, Admiral. We improve them. Our technology isn't designed for conquest. It's designed for survival and adaptation. When we share it, everyone benefits. Cortex's weapon was now pointed at the floor. The certainty that had driven his entire career was crumbling under the weight of evidence. But the wars were started by others who feared what they didn't understand. We defended ourselves, yes, but we never fired the first shot. Throughout the medical bay, alarms began sounding. The Council fleet was detecting energy signatures from across the galaxy as human implants continued to activate. What had been intended as a simple extermination of a single specimen was rapidly becoming something much larger. Sir, one of Cortex's officers reported through his communicator, we're receiving distress calls from 17 Council worlds. Human populations are changing. They're not attacking, but they're no longer following orders, and they're sharing technology that our scientists don't understand. David smiled sadly. We're not becoming conquerors, Admiral. We're becoming ourselves again. And that means we're going to try very hard to make sure no one else has to suffer what we've suffered. The Admiral looked around the medical bay, seeing his mixed heritage soldiers, the alien doctor who had chosen to protect her patient, and the young man who could have killed them all but chose instead to show them the truth. For the first time in his career, Admiral Cortex began to wonder if he had been fighting the wrong war. Outside, the awakening continued as humanity remembered its true nature and decided what to do with the power it had never wanted but could no longer deny. The silence in the medical bay stretched like a held breath. Admiral Cortex stood frozen, his weapon lowered, staring at genetic data that rewrote everything he thought he knew about himself and his people. Around him, Council soldiers discovered their own mixed heritage displayed on screens that hummed with David's enhanced consciousness. Then the station shuddered. What was that? Dr. Alara asked, checking her instruments. David's awareness had expanded beyond the medical bay, beyond the station itself. Through the network of awakening implants across the galaxy, he could sense what was happening. The other humans. They're not just remembering, they're choosing. On the main display, live feeds showed scenes from across human space. But these weren't the chaotic awakenings Cortex had expected. Instead, humans with newly activated abilities were using their enhanced capabilities to protect their alien neighbors. On the mining world of Titan's Rest, human workers with impossible strength were rescuing trapped Saurian miners from a collapsed tunnel. On the trade station New Harmony, human merchants were sharing healing technology with sick Vorthak children. They're helping, Alara whispered in amazement. David nodded, feeling the collective consciousness of his species stirring after millennia of sleep. We always have. Even when we forgot what we were, we kept trying to help. Admiral Cortex watched the feeds with growing confusion. This doesn't match any of our projections. Where are the demands for power? The attempts at domination? Those were your fears, not our nature, David replied. You've been fighting shadows for 50,000 years. The implants in David's spine reached full synchronization with his nervous system. Suddenly, he wasn't just David Reed anymore. He was connected to the collective memory of the endured. Every generation that had survived, every lesson learned, every moment of loss and hope stretching back to their origins. He saw the truth of his people's past with perfect clarity. The Endured had never been conquerors. They had been gardeners. Their original homeworld had been dying, poisoned by industrial accidents and ecological collapse. Instead of abandoning it, they had developed technology to heal themselves and their environment. The implants weren't weapons. They were medical devices that allowed rapid adaptation to damaged ecosystems. When they finally achieved space travel, they had carried this healing philosophy with them. Every world they encountered, they tried to improve. Failing civilizations were offered technology and knowledge. Dying species were given medical aid. Polluted planets were taught sustainable practices. "We were never trying to rule the galaxy," David said, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral memory. "We were trying to save it, but their success had bred fear." Other species, seeing how quickly the Endured could adapt and improve, began to believe they were being replaced rather than helped. Politicians and military leaders found it easier to blame the Endured for their own failures than to accept their aid. The first attacks had come without warning. Peaceful trading ships destroyed by defense forces, medical colonies bombed by fleets, claiming to prevent cultural contamination. Each act of violence had been justified by fabricated evidence of endured aggression. "You fought back," Cortex said, his voice hollow. "We defended ourselves. What choice did we have?" David accessed deeper records, showing the Admiral what really happened during the wars. The Endured had never launched offensive strikes. They had never conquered worlds or enslaved populations. Every battle had been defensive, every advance a retreat to safer ground. But each time they had been forced to reveal more of their capabilities, the galaxy had grown more frightened. Their healing technology was viewed as biological warfare. Their adaptive abilities were seen as shape-shifting deception. Their enhanced intelligence was interpreted as mind control. The more we tried to prove we weren't monsters, the more monstrous we appeared to those determined to fear us, David said. The final campaign against the Endured had been a coordinated effort by every major species in the galaxy. Not because the Endured had threatened them, but because they represented something these species couldn't accept, the possibility that there was a better way to live. "So you died out," Admiral Cortex said quietly. "No. We scattered. We hid. We bred with other species and let our children grow up thinking they were something else. We programmed our implants to stay dormant until—" David paused, feeling the weight of destiny. "Until the galaxy needed us again." On the screens around them, the situation across human space was becoming clearer. The awakening wasn't random. It was selective. Only humans in positions where they could help were experiencing full activation. Medical workers found themselves able to heal previously incurable diseases. Engineers discovered they could repair systems thought beyond saving. Farmers realized they could grow crops in poisoned soil. "It's starting again, isn't it?" Alara asked. "The fear." David nodded, sensing the communications flowing between council worlds. Military leaders were already calling for immediate strikes against human populations. The same pattern that had played out 50,000 years ago was beginning to repeat. But this time something was different. Admiral Cortex holstered his weapon. "Sir?" one of his officers asked in confusion. "Stand down," Cortex ordered. "All units, cease hostile actions against human populations." "Admiral, the Council has ordered—" "The Council has been acting on false information for 50,000 years." Cortex looked directly at David. "The Endured aren't the threat we believe them to be." David felt a surge of hope, but also caution. "What will you do?" "What I should have done years ago. Investigate the truth instead of blindly following orders." The Admiral activated his fleet communications. "All vessels, this is Cortex. Suspend Cleansing Protocol 7. We have new information that requires immediate analysis." Across the galaxy, Council warships hesitated in their attack formations. Some commanders obeyed their admiral's order. Others, driven by generations of propaganda, ignored it and continued their approach to human worlds. "They won't all listen," David said, his enhanced consciousness detecting the approaching threats. "Some of them are too afraid to stop." Admiral Cortex nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to protect the humans from my own people." The statement hung in the air like a declaration of war. The most decorated xenocide specialist in Council history was choosing to defend the species he had spent his career hunting. Why? David asked. Cortex touched his cybernetic implants, understanding for the first time why they had always felt so natural to him. Because you're right. We've been fighting the wrong war, and it's time to fight the right one. In the depths of space, on thousands of human worlds, people looked up at approaching warships and made the same choice their ancestors had made for millennia. They would not run. They would not hide. They would stand and protect those who could not protect themselves. The Endured had returned to save a galaxy that was trying very hard to destroy them. Again. 3 months after the awakening began, David Reed stood in the observation deck of New Hope Station, watching ships from 100 different worlds dock at the massive orbital facility. The station had been built in those months by humans and aliens working together, using technology that bridged the gap between species in ways that had never been possible before. The war was over. Not because one side had defeated the other, but because enough people had chosen a different path. Admiral Cortex had kept his word. When other Council fleets had ignored his orders and attacked human colonies, his ships had intervened. The battles had been brief but decisive. Enhanced humans working alongside sympathetic alien forces had proven that cooperation was stronger than fear. The Galactic Assembly wants to meet with you again, Dr. Alara said, approaching David at the observation window. She wore the insignia of the new Interspecies Medical Alliance, an organization that had grown from their partnership in the medical bay. Let me guess. They want guarantees that humans won't use their abilities for conquest. Actually, they want to know if we can help them solve the famine on the Outer Rim worlds. David smiled. It was always the same pattern. Fear, then acceptance, then the inevitable request for help. Humanity had spent 50,000 years hiding, but they couldn't hide their nature forever. They were healers, builders, gardeners of civilization. Across the galaxy, the changes continued. Human engineers were designing cities that worked in harmony with alien biology. Human doctors were sharing medical techniques that treated species-specific diseases thought incurable. Human farmers were teaching sustainable agriculture that could feed worlds while healing damaged ecosystems. Not every world had accepted the new reality. Some systems had closed their borders entirely, declaring quarantine zones around human populations. Others had tried to implement forced sterilization programs to prevent the spread of endured genetics. But these efforts were failing as mixed heritage populations revealed themselves across the galaxy. How many have awakened so far? Alara asked. About 12% of humans with active implants, David replied. But remember, only about 30% of humans carry the genetic markers to begin with. We're not as widespread as the propaganda claimed. The awakening had been selective in other ways too. The implants seemed to activate based on need and character rather than bloodline purity. Some humans with strong endured genetics remained unchanged, while others with only trace amounts found themselves developing remarkable abilities. The technology was choosing its hosts based on their willingness to help others. And the others, the ones whose implants haven't activated? They're still human. Still our family. The implants don't make someone better or worse. They just make them more capable of doing what they were already inclined to do. Through the observation window, they could see the daily miracle that had become routine. Alien children played alongside human children in the station's gardens. Saurian engineers worked with human technicians to improve ship designs. Vorthak artists collaborated with human musicians to create new forms of beauty. The fear was still there. David could sense it in the darker corners of the galaxy, in military installations and government chambers where old prejudices died hard, but it was being overwhelmed by something stronger. Hope. David, Alara said carefully, there's something else the Assembly wants to discuss. Some of the member worlds are asking about governance. Now, they want humans to rule them. It wasn't a question. They're pointing out that human-administered systems have shown significant improvements in quality of life, economic stability, and technological advancement. David turned away from the window. This was the trap his people had fallen into before. Success that bred dependence, dependence that bred resentment, resentment that bred fear. What did you tell them? The same thing you told me to say. Humans will gladly share their knowledge and abilities, but we won't rule anyone. We're consultants, not conquerors. It was the new doctrine that human communities across the galaxy had adopted. They would help They would heal, they would teach and build and grow, but they would not govern. They had learned that lesson too well in their genetic memory. Admiral Cortex appeared on the observation deck, his cybernetic implants now modified with hybrid human council technology that worked better than either system alone. David, we have a situation. Let me guess. Another system wants to hire human administrators. Worse. The hegemony is offering to make you emperor of the core worlds. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. How many times do we have to refuse before they understand? They think you're playing politics, holding out for a better offer. It was the fundamental misunderstanding that kept repeating itself. Other species assumed that humans wanted power because that's what they would want in humanity's position. They couldn't comprehend a species that genuinely preferred to remain in the background, fixing problems and healing wounds without claiming credit. Sir, a technician called from across the deck, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Earth, the human homeworld that most humans had never seen, the origin point that had become more legend than reality over thousands of years of diaspora. David hadn't expected to hear from Earth so soon. The transmission resolved into the image of an elderly human woman with silver hair and eyes that held the depth of genetic memory. My name is Director Sarah Walsh. I speak for the Earth Council. David felt his implants resonate with hers. She was fully awakened, her abilities refined by decades of careful development. But more than that, she carried the weight of leadership, not political power, but moral authority. Director Walsh, we weren't expecting contact from Earth. We've been watching the awakening with great interest and great concern. Her expression was serious. David, you and the others are doing remarkable work, but you're repeating the same mistakes our ancestors made. What do you mean? You're trying to help everyone. You're making yourselves indispensable, and eventually that will make you targets again. David felt a chill of recognition. She was right. Already there were signs of the old patterns emerging. Systems competing for human attention, politicians calling for regulations to limit human influence, military leaders arguing that enhanced humans posed inherent security risks. What do you suggest? Come home. All of you. Let the galaxy learn to stand on its own. The proposal was radical. Withdraw all humans from alien space, leaving behind only their knowledge and technology. No human advisors, no mixed crews, no integrated communities. Complete separation until the galaxy could prove it had moved beyond its genocidal past. And if they start fighting each other without us to help? Director Walsh's smile was sad but wise. Then they'll learn the same lesson we learned 50,000 years ago. That survival requires cooperation, not conquest. And maybe eventually they'll invite us back on better terms. David looked out at the thriving station, at the cooperation and hope that had grown from the awakening. The thought of abandoning it all felt like failure. But he also remembered the genetic memories of his people. The cycle of helping, succeeding, being feared, and being hunted. It had repeated for millennia, and it would repeat again unless something fundamental changed. How long? He asked. Give them a generation. Maybe 2. Let them miss us before they remember to fear us. Admiral Cortex stepped forward. You don't have to leave. There are those of us who will stand with you. We know, David replied, and that's exactly why we have to go. As long as you're protecting us, you're not learning to protect each other. The decision, when it came, was unanimous across human space. They would withdraw gradually and peacefully, leaving behind gifts of knowledge and technology. They would return to Earth and the systems they had claimed as their own, building a civilization that could serve as an example rather than a crutch. Some aliens begged them to stay. Others celebrated their departure. Most simply watched in confusion, as the species they had feared and courted chose voluntary exile over the power that was being offered to them. As the last human ships departed for Earth, David sent a final message to the galaxy. We're not leaving because we're afraid or because we don't care. We're leaving because we care too much. The universe belongs to all of us, and sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them learn to help themselves. 50 years later, when the first alien delegation arrived at Earth seeking renewed contact, they found a human civilization that had grown beyond anything the galaxy had imagined, not through conquest or expansion, but through the simple, radical act of becoming the best version of themselves. And when they asked if humanity was ready to rejoin galactic civilization, the answer was the same one the Endured had given for 50,000 years. We're ready to help if you're ready to learn. The galaxy was finally ready to listen,